and welcome to Crowvane Manor. Wherever you are, and whatever kind of night it's been, you've come to the right place to slow down. Let the world go quiet for a while. Out here, none of it needs your attention. Many of you return to these rooms night after night, and I'm grateful for that. There's a reason you keep coming back. The stories kept inside these walls aren't quite like the ones you'll hear anywhere else. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. And if these stories stay with you, a like and a subscribe help more than you know. Now get comfortable, breathe slow, and let's open the door together. When I was probably 15 or 16, my friends and I used to go down to the railroad tracks at night to smoke weed and hang out. It was typical teenager behavior. We thought we were being secretive, grown up, and rebellious, even though we were mostly just a group of kids sitting around in the dark with nowhere better to be. The tracks were far enough from houses that adults would not bother us, and there was a long stretch where you could sit near the gravel without being seen from the road. At the time, it seemed like the perfect place. Looking back now, I know it was stupid. Railroad tracks are not somewhere you should hang around, especially at night. But when you are that age, you do not always think about the obvious dangers. You think you will hear a train coming. You think you will have plenty of time to move. You think bad things happen to other people. That night, the tracks were quiet. The area around them was mostly dark fields, trees, and a few distant lights from houses or roads. There were no street lights near where we sat. The only light came from the moon, the stars, and whatever weak glow was coming from farther away. The rails stretched ahead of us in both directions, disappearing into darkness. It was one of those long, straight sections where you could see a great distance if there was any light at all. The tracks did not curve much. There were no nearby switches, side rails, yards, or places where a train could turn off and go another way. Just two rails running straight through the dark for miles. We had been there for maybe 10 minutes. We were talking, laughing, passing things around, and doing whatever teenagers do when they are trying to make a boring night feel important. Nobody was paying much attention to the tracks at first. We all knew trains used them, but it was not like we had seen one every time we went there. Then we heard a train horn. It was faint at first, not loud enough to make us jump, but clear enough that we all stopped talking. It came from far down the tracks, a long, low horn carrying through the night. For a second, nobody moved. We all looked in the same direction. At the far end of the tracks, there was a light. At first, it was tiny, just a white point in the distance, low enough that it lined up with the rails. It looked exactly like what you would expect to see from an oncoming train. The horn sounded again. This time, it seemed a little closer. The light grew brighter. I remember the feeling in my stomach when I realized we were sitting directly on or near the tracks. We had all seen enough movies and heard enough warnings to know what came next. You do not wait around when a train is coming. For a few seconds, we just stared. It was like none of us wanted to be the first person to say it out loud. Then, somebody said something like, "Train." That was enough. We got off the tracks. Not in a dramatic panic at first. We moved quickly, stepping into the gravel and grass beside the rails. We figured we would wait for the train to pass, then go back to sitting around once it was gone. The horn came again. The light looked bigger. It seemed to be moving toward us. At that point, there was no doubt in my mind that it was a train. The sound was too recognizable. It was not a car horn. It was not a truck. It was that long, hollow train horn that seems to come from everywhere at once when you hear it at night. And the light was wrong for a car, too. It was one large central light. not two headlights spaced apart the way a vehicle would have them. It was centered over the tracks. We stood off to the side and watched. The light kept getting brighter. The horn kept sounding. I remember thinking we had plenty of time because it still seemed far away. We were off the tracks. We were safe. We could wait for it to pass, maybe make jokes about how close we had come to being idiots, then go back to hanging out. But something felt strange. The train was not getting as close as it should have been. The light had grown brighter, but the sound did not seem to match it. It was like the horn was coming closer, but the actual train itself was still too far away. I remember trying to see the outline of the engine behind the light. There was nothing. No dark shape around it. No wider front end. No rows of lights. No sound of metal wheels grinding along the rails. No rumble under the ground. Just the horn. And the one bright light. Still, none of us questioned it much at first. We were teenagers, standing beside railroad tracks in the dark. A train horn and a headlight meant a train. There was no reason to think otherwise. We waited. A minute passed. Maybe two. The horn stopped. The light did not move much. Then it seemed to dim. At first I thought maybe the train had slowed down. Maybe it had stopped farther up the tracks. Maybe it was waiting for something. Maybe there was a crossing somewhere beyond where we could see. But there was no crossing close enough that we knew about. There was no junction. There was no sidetrack. There was nowhere for a freight train to go. The tracks ran straight. We kept watching. Then, the light was gone. Not like it turned and moved away. Not like it passed behind trees or a hill. It was just gone. The horn did not sound again. The rails were dark. The night went quiet. For a few seconds, none of us spoke. We were all staring down the tracks, waiting for the train to appear anyway. We expected the engine to come out of the darkness with that huge central light, maybe delayed by the distance or the way sound travels. But nothing came. No train, no cars, no vibration, no rumble. Nothing. We stood there for a few more minutes, waiting. The silence felt strange after the horn. That was what bothered me most. A train is not quiet. Even before you see it, you can usually feel it somehow. You hear the wheels. You hear the low vibration. You hear the engine getting louder. The rails seem to carry the sound. But after the horn and the light disappeared, there was nothing at all. It was like the tracks had swallowed it. Eventually, someone said maybe we had imagined it. That sounded stupid, because all of us heard the horn. All of us saw the light. It was not just one person claiming something happened. We had all stopped and moved off the tracks because we believed a train was coming. Maybe it was farther away than we thought. That was another explanation. Maybe the sound carried weirdly at night. Maybe the light belonged to something in the distance and our brains connected it to the horn. Maybe the train had been on a different section of tracks we could not see. But that did not make sense either. There were no deviating tracks near us, no split rails, no two-lane section where a train could move on to another line and disappear. The tracks were almost perfectly straight for a long distance in both directions. You could look down them and see the rails narrowing into one black point, and there was no obvious place for a full freight train to turn away. It could not have just left the line. And even if it had somehow stopped somewhere far away, we should have still heard it. A freight train does not vanish silently. We walked along the side of the tracks a little farther, trying to see whether there was any sign of it. We looked down the rail line. We listened. We waited for another horn. Nothing. Eventually, we went back to hanging out. But the mood had changed. Nobody really wanted to sit directly on the tracks anymore. We stayed nearby, but we kept glancing down the dark line where the light had appeared. Every distant sound made us stop talking. Every car on a road farther away made someone look up. I do not remember us seeing anything else that night. No second light. No train coming from the other direction. No footsteps. No strange figure walking along the tracks. Just that one moment. A horn. A bright central light. The feeling that something large was coming toward us. Then, nothing. Afterward, I tried to explain it in every normal way I could think of. Maybe it was a car somewhere in the distance. But I specifically remember that there was only one large central light. Cars have two headlights. Even if one headlight were out, the sound would not have been a train horn. And the light was directly lined up with the tracks. Maybe it was someone using a powerful flashlight. That did not explain the horn. It did not explain why the light seemed to grow larger and closer. And it definitely did not explain why it was so perfectly centered on the rails. Maybe there was a train farther away, and the darkness made it seem closer than it was. That is possible. Distance at night can be hard to judge, especially when you only have one light to look at. The horn could carry farther than expected. Maybe the train was much farther down the line than we realized, and we left before it reached us. But we waited. We waited long enough that something should have happened. And the light disappeared. It did not stay where it was. It did not keep approaching. It did not turn into a distant engine. It simply faded or vanished completely. Maybe it was some kind of rail maintenance vehicle. That is another possibility. Maybe it was smaller than a train. Maybe it had one central light. Maybe it made a sound that we mistook for a horn. But even then, where did it go? There were no switches, no nearby crossings, no side road, no way for it to vanish from a straight line without us seeing it move away. I do not know. The weirdest part is that it did not feel supernatural at first. It felt completely real. The horn sounded real. The light looked real. The danger felt real enough that all of us moved away from the tracks without arguing. That is why it stayed with me. If it had been something obviously impossible, maybe we would have laughed about it. But it was just believable enough to make us all react normally. Then it disappeared. Sometimes I think it might have been an actual train that we simply misunderstood. Maybe we were high, tired, and bad at judging distance. Maybe the sound bounced through the trees and fields in a strange way. Maybe the light belonged to some completely normal machine that was farther away than it looked. That would be the safest explanation. But I still remember how empty the tracks were afterward. I remember how straight they were. I remember the feeling of looking down the line and knowing there was nowhere for something that big to go. And I remember how quiet it became after the horn stopped. No train ever came. No one ever saw it again. And even now, when I hear a train horn late at night, I think about that one bright light sitting on the rails in the distance, moving toward us until it suddenly did not exist anymore. I grew up in a very small town in Montana. It was the kind of place where people knew each other. Roads got quiet early, and the land outside town felt much bigger than the town itself. We lived in an old house on a decent amount of property beneath some large cliffs. There were hiking trails nearby, thick areas of property beneath some large cliffs. There were hiking trails nearby, thick areas of trees, and enough open wilderness around us that seeing wildlife was normal. Deer were common. Small animals came through the yard all the time. You would hear things moving in the brush at night, especially once the weather warmed up. In winter, the snow made every sound more noticeable. A branch snapping could sound like a gunshot. An animal moving through the trees could be loud enough to make you stop and listen. We were not living in the middle of a city where nature was something you watched on television. It was right there around us. The forest began just beyond parts of our property. The cliffs and trails were close enough that people would hike around there during the day. At night, though, it felt like a completely different world. Every year, usually sometime in January or February, my family held a party. It was a winter tradition. Friends would come over, everyone would bring food or drinks, and we would get rid of old Christmas trees in a huge bonfire. By that point, the holidays were over, the decorations were down, and people were ready for some excuse to gather again during the long, cold stretch of winter. The adults loved it. They would stand around the fire, talking, laughing, drinking, and catching up with people they had not seen in a while. The old trees would burn fast at first, sending sparks up into the sky, then settle into a roaring pile of orange and red. The fire was big enough that you could feel the heat from far away, especially when the temperature outside was low. For the kids, it was fun at first. We would roast things over the fire, run around in the snow, throw snowballs, and stay outside longer than we normally would because there were adults nearby. But after a while, the grown-up conversations got boring. The adults would all be grouped around the bonfire, talking about work, money, people we did not know, and things that had nothing to do with us. So the kids usually found somewhere else to go. On our property, near the far corner, my dad had built a tree fort. It was not some tiny platform nailed badly to a tree. For us, it felt like a real fort. It was high enough off the ground that climbing into it felt exciting. It had a slide coming down from one side, places where you could sit, and enough room for a group of kids to crowd together and whisper, laugh, or make up games. During the day, it was just a tree fort. At night, especially in winter, it felt like we had our own little world away from the adults. The fort sat near a chain-link fence that separated our property from the forest. On the other side of the fence, there were trees, uneven ground, brush, and a darkness that seemed deeper than the darkness around the house. The bonfire was visible in the distance, but it was far enough away that it did not light up the trees near the fort very well. You could see the orange flicker behind us. You could hear the adults laughing sometimes. But the forest side of the fence stayed mostly black. That night, we had gone out there while the party was still going on. I was around 12 years old. A few other kids were with me, either friends or kids whose families had come to the party. We were all in that age where you wanted freedom, but still wanted to feel like you were somewhere safe. We climbed up into the fort and started messing around. Someone would go down the slide, then climb back up through the snow. Someone else would dare them to go faster. We were laughing, pushing each other around in the harmless way kids do, and trying to be louder than the group before us. It was around 9:00 at night. The sky was dark, and the snow on the ground reflected just enough light from the house and bonfire that we could see the outlines of things nearby. The trees beyond the fence were darker. The farther you looked into the forest, the less you could see. I remember being on top of the tree fort with everyone else, laughing at something stupid. Then I heard a crunch. It came from directly below us, not from the yard, not from the path back to the house, from the other side of the fence. The sound was quiet, but clear, snow compressing under something heavy. I stopped laughing. At first, I thought it might be one of the adults coming over to tell us not to climb around in the dark. Or maybe one of the dogs had gotten out, though I knew the dogs were inside that night. It could have been a deer. We had deer around, and a deer moving through snow could make plenty of noise. But there was something about the sound that made me pay attention. It was too close. The fence was only a short distance from the tree fort, and the crunch had come from right beneath us, just beyond the chain link. I told everyone to be quiet. At first, nobody listened. They thought I was trying to scare them or start some kind of game, but I said it again more seriously, and the group slowly went quiet. The laughter stopped. The slide stopped moving. For a few seconds, all we could hear was the bonfire far away and the faint sound of voices from the adults. Then I leaned over the side of the fort. I looked down toward the fence. At first, I did not see anything clearly. There was a dark yellowish shape moving beneath us. It was low to the ground and partly hidden by the fence and snow. The bonfire's light did not reach that far, but there was enough reflected light that I could make out movement. Something was crouched or moving slowly along the forest side of the fence. It was not a dog. It was not one of our dogs, anyway. They were inside. It was not one of the adults. No person would have been crawling around in the snow beneath the tree fort without saying something. The shape moved again. For one terrible second, I tried to tell myself it was a deer. That was the easiest answer. Deer were common. A deer could come close to the fence. A deer could move quietly through the snow. But it was too low, too smooth, and the color was wrong. The shape had a yellowish or tan look to it, even in the dark. Its body stayed close to the ground in a way that made my stomach turn. I could not see every detail, but I knew enough about animals to understand that this was not something I wanted near us. I leaned over again. Then I saw its eyes. They caught the faint light and reflected back at me. Two shining eyes from the other side of the chain-link fence. The animal was staring up at me. That was when I knew what it was. A mountain lion. I do not know how else to describe the moment, except to say that my entire body went cold. I had heard about mountain lions. Everybody in that area knew they existed. You heard stories. You saw warning signs near trails. You heard people talk about sightings, tracks, pets disappearing, or strange screams in the woods at night. Mountain lions were not some mythical creature to us. They were real animals, and they were dangerous. But knowing that mountain lions exist and looking one directly in the eyes from a few feet above you are two completely different things. It was big. Even though I did not see all of it at once, I could tell it was much larger than any house cat, larger than a dog, and built in a way that made it feel powerful. The animal moved with a kind of quiet control that made everything else around it seem small. It was not panicking. It was not running away from the noise. It was not scared of the fire in the distance or the children laughing above it. It was there. Watching, I remember seeing the shape of its head more clearly for a second. I remember the eyes. I remember the tan or yellowish coat blending into the darkness. I remember feeling like it knew exactly where we were. Then, I screamed. I yelled at the top of my 12-year-old lungs for everybody to run back to the house. I do not remember the exact words. I probably said something like, "Mountain lion, run." Maybe I just screamed for everyone to get inside. But I know I was loud enough that the other kids immediately understood something was wrong. The mood changed in a second. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody asked whether I was joking. I jumped off the tree fort. The snow below was soft enough to break the fall, but I still landed hard and stumbled. I did not care. I just wanted distance between myself and the fence. The other kids came down the slide as fast as they could. I remember hearing the scrape of boots, the sound of snow being kicked up, kids yelling, and everyone moving at once. We ran across the property toward the house. The adult group by the bonfire was still some distance away. The fire was brighter as we got closer, and for a second, I wanted to run straight to them and scream what I saw. But the house felt safer. The doors were there. The light was there. The adults were there too, or close enough to hear us. We ran. I do not remember looking back. I did not want to see whether the mountain lion had followed us along the fence. I did not want to know whether it had climbed, jumped, or moved through the trees beside the property. I just remember running as fast as I could through snow, my chest burning, my legs shaking, and my mind repeating the same thing over and over. It was a mountain lion. It was right there. It had been looking at me. We made it back to the house, or close enough to the adults that people started asking what was going on. At first, nobody took it seriously. That was the frustrating part. We were kids running in from the dark, yelling and out of breath. There had been a bonfire, a party, noise, people drinking, and other kids messing around. The adults probably assumed somebody had scared someone else. Maybe they thought I had seen a shadow. Maybe they thought it was a dog. Maybe they thought one of the older kids had made up a story to get attention. But I was not joking. I knew what I had seen. I tried to explain that there was a mountain lion on the other side of the fence, right under the tree fort. I told them it was staring at us. I told them I saw the eyes. I told them it was close. Some people looked toward the trees. Some may have gone out farther with flashlights. I do not remember exactly what happened after everyone heard the story. I only remember feeling angry and scared because people did not seem to understand how real it had been. They had not been the one looking down from the fort. They had not seen those eyes looking back. The adults may have believed there was an animal nearby, but not understood how close it had been. They may have assumed it was a deer or coyote. They may have told us to stay near the house and stop going so far out on the property. But I could not shake the image. That night, I kept thinking about the tree fort. I kept thinking about the chain link fence. I kept thinking about how little that fence would actually matter to an animal like that. A chain link fence separates yards. It keeps dogs in or out. It makes people feel like there is a clear boundary between their property and the woods, but it is not much of a barrier if something truly wants to get over it. That was what scared me after I was safe inside. The mountain lion had been on the other side of the fence, but that did not mean it had to stay there. We lived in that area long enough that hearing mountain lions was not unusual. Sometimes, late at night, you would hear a scream outside. Not a normal animal sound. Not a dog bark. Not a coyote yip. A sharp, high, eerie scream that could make your skin crawl if you did not know what it was. Mountain lions can make sounds that are hard to describe if you have never heard them. They can sound almost human. They can sound like someone screaming in pain or fear somewhere out in the dark. I had heard those sounds outside my window before. Sometimes the scream would come from far enough away that you could tell it was out in the woods. Other times, it sounded closer. Close enough that I would lie in bed and stare at the window, trying not to imagine what might be moving through the trees. I even had recordings on my phone. That is one reason I never doubted what I saw that night. I knew the animals were around. I knew the cliffs, trails, and woods near our property were their kind of territory. I knew it was possible for one to come close. But possible does not make it less terrifying. There is a difference between knowing a dangerous animal lives somewhere in the region and realizing it has been quietly standing just below your tree fort while you and your friends laugh above it. People sometimes act like seeing wildlife is exciting, and it can be. From a safe distance, in daylight, with adults around, seeing a mountain lion would probably be incredible. It would be one of those once-in-a-lifetime things people talk about afterward. But that was not what this felt like. This felt like being watched. The mountain lion had not run away when it heard us. It had not fled from the fire. It had stayed low in the snow and stared up at me. I still remember the moment I recognized the eyes. There was no gradual understanding. No calm thought process. 1 second, I was trying to decide whether I was looking at a deer. The next second, I knew I was looking at something that could hurt us. I knew the shape. I knew the eyes. I knew the way it moved. After that, I never felt the same about the tree fort at night. During the day, it was still fun. The fort was still a place to climb, slide, and play. The fence was still just a fence. The woods were still woods. But once it got dark, I would think about that animal beneath us. I would think about the crunch in the snow. I would think about how quietly it had moved. And I would think about those shining eyes on the other side of the chain link. I do not know whether it had been stalking us, watching us out of curiosity, passing through, or simply standing there because it heard noise and wanted to see what was happening. I do not know what a mountain lion was thinking. Maybe it was more scared of us than we were of it. Maybe the noise from the party had drawn it close. Maybe it was hunting something else and happened to be near the fence. There are plenty of normal animal behavior explanations. But when you are 12 years old, sitting in a tree fort at night with your friends, none of that matters. All that matters is that something large is under you in the snow. Something silent. Something watching. And you are far enough from the house that the adults cannot hear you unless you scream. To this day, people sometimes act like I am exaggerating when I tell the story. Maybe they think I saw a big dog. Maybe they think it was a coyote. Maybe they think I got scared by a shadow because I was a kid and the woods were dark. But I know what I saw. I saw a yellowish shape moving under the tree fort. I saw the eyes shine back at me. And I saw a mountain lion staring through the fence while my friends and I sat only a few feet away. That was enough for me. I did not need to see it pounce. I did not need to hear it scream. I did not need anyone else to believe me right away. I knew it was there. And I have never forgotten the feeling of looking down into the dark and realizing something in the forest was already looking back. My grandma had a favorite seat at the kitchen table. Everybody in the family knew it was hers, even if nobody ever said it out loud. It was just understood. If you walked into the kitchen and saw someone sitting there, part of you almost expected it to be her. She would sit in that chair with a cup of Lipton tea and a few premium saltine crackers nearby. Sometimes the crackers were still in the sleeve, sometimes they were stacked on a small plate, and sometimes there would be a few crumbs on the table from where she had broken one apart while talking. That image is one of the strongest memories I have of her. She always looked comfortable there, not dressed up for company or going somewhere. Just at home, usually wearing one of the floral dresses she liked to wear around the house. The kind of dress that became so familiar that years later, you can remember the colors and pattern even if you cannot explain why it stuck in your mind. The kitchen table was where she drank tea, talked to whoever came through the room, and watched the normal movement of the household. People would walk in looking for something to eat, open the fridge, grab a drink, ask a question, or complain about being bored. She was often just there, calm and present, making the kitchen feel occupied even when nothing else was happening. As a kid, you do not always realize how much a person's routine becomes part of the house. You do not think about it while they are alive. You just know that Grandma sits there. Grandma drinks tea there. Grandma has crackers there. Grandma wears that floral dress around the house. Then, when they are gone, the room still looks the same, but something in it feels different. My home at the time was on the second floor of an apartment building. It was not huge, but it felt big enough when I was 10. There were two entrances. The main entrance was in the living room, where most people came in. Then there was another door in the back room, past the kitchen. The layout made sense once you lived there. You could come in through the living room, walk through the kitchen, and reach the back part of the apartment. Or you could enter through the back and come through the kitchen from the other direction. The kitchen sat between the more active parts of the home. It was a place people passed through constantly. That made it feel strange after my grandma died. Her favorite chair was still there. The kitchen table was still there. The cupboards, refrigerator, counters, and sink were all exactly where they had always been. Nothing about the room had changed much physically. But the place where she usually sat was empty. At first, that emptiness was noticeable all the time. You would walk through the kitchen and almost look toward the chair automatically. Some part of you expected to see her holding a cup of tea or looking up at whoever entered. Then you would remember she was not there anymore. Over time, I guess you get used to that kind of absence. Not completely. You never completely get used to it. But the room becomes normal again, at least on the surface. The chair becomes just a chair. The table becomes just a table. You stop expecting the person to be there every time you pass. At least, that is what I thought had happened to me. Sometime after she passed away, I had some friends over to play Gauntlet Legends on the Nintendo 64. At 10 years old, that was a major event. Having friends over meant snacks, arguments about who got which controller, somebody always saying it was their turn, and everybody crowded around the television. Gauntlet Legends was one of those games that felt perfect for a group because everyone could play together, fight through levels, collect items, and blame each other when things went wrong. We were excited about it all day. The Nintendo 64 was set up in the living room. The game was ready. Controllers were probably spread out on the floor or couch. We had likely already spent time deciding who would play which character and who had to wait for the next round. One of my friends lived on the first floor of the same building. Because of that, they did not come through the main entrance. Instead, they decided to use the back door. That entrance was closer and easier for them to reach from downstairs. I remember being excited when I realized they were coming. At that age, even something small, like a friend arriving, felt important. You did not want to waste time. You wanted to get everyone inside, get the game going, and start playing before anyone had to leave. I heard them at the back entrance, or knew they had arrived, and I ran through the apartment to let them in. I went from the living room, through the kitchen, and toward the back room. The kitchen lights were on. Everything looked ordinary. I remember moving quickly, probably not paying attention to anything except getting to the door. I had passed through that kitchen hundreds or thousands of times. It was just a familiar space between where I was and where I needed to go. Then, for some reason, I glanced back. I do not know why. Maybe I heard something small. Maybe I felt something. Maybe I only turned because children do random things without thinking. But I looked back toward the kitchen table, and I saw my grandma sitting in her favorite seat. It only lasted a split second, but it was clear. That is the part that has stayed with me all these years. It was not a vague shadow in the corner of my eye. It was not a shape that looked like a person if I stared at it hard enough. It was not a reflection in a window or a moment where the light made an empty chair look different. I saw her. She was sitting exactly where she used to sit. She looked peaceful. She looked happy. I remember that expression more than anything else. She was not sad. She was not staring at me in some frightening way. She was not pale, transparent, or distorted. She just looked like my grandma, sitting comfortably at the kitchen table. She was wearing one of her floral dresses. The dress looked familiar enough that I recognized it immediately. It was the kind of thing she wore around the house, the kind of clothing I had seen so many times that it belonged to my mental image of her. She was in full color. That is another detail I cannot forget. The kitchen was normal around her. The table was there. The chair was there. The room looked the way it always did. And she looked completely real inside it. For one brief second, she was simply there. Then I looked again. She was gone. The chair was empty. There was no cup of tea, no crackers, no floral dress, no person sitting at the table. Nothing had changed in the room except that she was no longer there. I stopped. I do not remember exactly what I did next. I may have stood there, frozen. I may have blinked and looked again, trying to make my eyes understand what I had just seen. I may have walked a few steps back toward the kitchen. But I remember double-checking. I looked at the chair again because my mind could not accept that it was empty. The space where she had been was normal. The table was normal. The chair was normal. Everything looked exactly as it should have looked after she was gone. But I could still see the image in my head. Her sitting there, her expression, her dress, the way she looked peaceful and genuinely happy. For a 10-year-old, it was confusing more than anything. I do not remember screaming. I do not remember feeling like I was in danger. I did not run away from the kitchen or refuse to go back into it. Instead, I think I was just shocked. I did not understand whether I had actually seen something or whether my brain had shown me a memory so strongly that it felt real. My friends were waiting at the back door. The game was waiting in the living room. There was still noise and excitement around the apartment. So I probably kept moving. I probably opened the door, let them in, and went back to playing Gauntlet Legends like nothing had happened. That seems strange to me now, but kids can do that. Something confusing happens, but there are other things going on. Adults are not standing around asking questions, and you do not know how to explain what you saw. So, you push it down. You act normal, because you do not know what else to do. I do not remember telling anyone at the time. Maybe I did, and nobody took it seriously. Maybe I mentioned it to someone later. Maybe I kept it to myself because I did not want people to think I was lying or trying to get attention. But the moment stayed with me. Years passed, and I still remembered it. Not as a blurry dream, not as a story I heard someone else tell, as something I saw. 1 second, I was running through the kitchen to let my friends in. The next, my grandma was there. Then, she was gone. Sometimes I have wondered whether grief can do that to a person. Maybe I saw the chair, and my mind filled in the rest because I associated that seat with her so strongly. Maybe the kitchen light hit the chair, the table, or some object in a particular way, and for one brief moment, my brain turned it into an image I expected to see. Maybe I was 10 years old and missing her more than I realized. Maybe the memory of her was so strong that it became vivid enough to feel real. I know that is possible. Our brains hold on to familiar people in powerful ways. You can catch yourself expecting someone to walk into a room after they are gone. You can hear a familiar voice in a crowd. You can smell something that reminds you of them and feel like they are suddenly close again. Maybe that is what happened. But the thing that keeps me from fully dismissing it is how specific the image was. I did not just feel like she was there. I saw her. I saw her face. I saw her expression. I saw her floral dress. I saw her sitting in the exact chair where she had spent so much time. The moment was brief, but it did not feel blurry. It did not feel imaginary while it was happening. It felt completely normal for that single second. That is almost the strangest part. There was no warning, no cold air, no sudden darkness, no weird sound, no feeling of dread. I was just running through my home on the way to let my friends in. Then I turned my head, and my grandma was at the kitchen table as though she had never left. She looked peaceful. She looked happy. Then I looked again, and the chair was empty. I have thought about whether she might have been there because of the game night. Maybe she saw that I was happy. Maybe she knew I was excited to have friends over. Maybe she was simply connected to that kitchen and appeared in the place where she had felt most at home. Or maybe none of that is true. Maybe it was only my memory. I do not know. I do not think I need to know. The experience never felt threatening. It was not one of those stories where a person sees something and spends the rest of their life terrified. It did not make me afraid of the kitchen. It did not make me afraid to sit at the table or pass through the apartment at night. It made me sad in a strange, gentle way. For a second, I got to see her again. Not sick, not gone, not remembered through photographs or stories, just sitting where she always sat, looking happy. Even now, when I think of my grandma, I do not only think about her passing away. I think about that chair. I think about Lipton tea. I think about premium saltine crackers. I think about the floral dresses she wore around the house. And I think about that one moment. I was 10 years old, running to let my friends in so we could play Gauntlet Legends on the Nintendo 64. I glanced back toward the kitchen. And there she was. Then, she was gone. When I was 8 years old, I was hanging out with my 18-year-old cousin in her car. It was sometime in the evening, probably between 5 and 7. I cannot remember the exact time, but I remember the feeling of the day clearly. It was not fully dark yet, but the light outside had started changing. The sky had that late evening look, where everything feels softer, and the sun is either low or already gone behind buildings and trees. I remember where we were parked. I remember the kind of spot it was. I remember sitting in the passenger seat with the door wide open. And I remember what I was wearing. That is one of the reasons the memory has stayed with me for so long. A lot of childhood memories become blurry after enough years pass. You remember the general event, but the details disappear. You might remember that something happened without remembering the weather, the clothes you wore, the place you were sitting, or what the room looked like. This memory is not like that. I remember it almost too clearly. My cousin was in the driver's seat listening to music. She was older than me, and at the time I probably thought she was one of the coolest people in the world simply because she was 18 and had a car. Being in the passenger seat while she played music made me feel older too, even though I was only 8. She was kind of zoning out. She was not talking much. She was just sitting there, listening to whatever song was playing, probably staring ahead and relaxing. I was sitting beside her with the passenger door open, not doing much of anything. I may have been looking around, watching people, or just enjoying the fact that I was allowed to sit in the car with her. Nothing strange was happening at first. It was an ordinary moment. The car was parked. Music was playing. My cousin was distracted. I was sitting there, probably bored in the way kids get bored when older people are doing nothing interesting. Then I suddenly felt like I needed to look outside. It was not a thought like, I wonder what is happening out there. It felt more like an urge. I do not know why I had it. I was not looking for anything in the sky. I was not scared. I was not thinking about UFOs, aliens, planets, or anything like that. I was just sitting in a car with my cousin. But for some reason, I wanted to get out and look up. So I did. I leaned out through the open passenger door and looked toward the sky. At that exact moment, I saw something fly directly above the car. It looked like a perfectly shaped plate. That is still the best way I know how to explain it. It was not shaped like an airplane. It was not shaped like a helicopter. It did not look like a bird, balloon, kite, or any normal thing that could be floating overhead. It was round and flat-looking, almost exactly like a plate turned upside down in the sky. I remember its shape being strangely clear. Even though it happened quickly, I did not see a vague blur or a distant dot. I saw something solid enough that I immediately noticed the outline. It was smooth and circular. It looked flat from below, but not completely flat. There was a slight shape to it, like it had a top and bottom, even though I could only see it from underneath. It passed right above our car, not far off in the distance, not high enough that I had to strain my eyes to see it. It was close enough that I felt like it had noticed us. Then it flashed its lights, a few times. The lights were bright. They did not look like the blinking lights you see on airplanes. They did not seem like regular navigation lights. These flashes were stronger and more sudden. They lit up in a way that made the object impossible to ignore. For a few seconds, I just stared. I remember feeling confused before I felt scared. As a kid, my mind started trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Maybe it was an airplane. Maybe it was some strange helicopter. Maybe it was a toy. Maybe it was part of a show or some kind of machine I had never seen before. But none of those explanations fit. It was too close. It was too quiet. And it did not move like anything I knew. The light flashed again. I remember wondering whether it was taking pictures. That may sound strange, but it was honestly what came into my mind. The lights were pointed down toward the car and the area around it. I thought maybe it was somehow looking at us, photographing us, or scanning the ground. I did not know where that thought came from. Maybe it was because of the way the lights flashed. Maybe it was because I was 8 years old and trying to explain something that did not make sense. Maybe I had seen something in a movie that made me think lights in the sky meant cameras. But that was the feeling I had. It seemed interested in the car. It seemed interested in the area around us. Then it flew away. It did not slowly drift off. It did not turn in a wide circle. It did not make the gradual movement an airplane would make as it headed away. It was there, directly above us. And then it moved so fast that I barely understood what had happened. One moment I could see the round plate-shaped object and its bright lights. The next, it was gone. It shot away with such speed that my brain could not keep up with it. I did not see it disappear behind a building. I did not see it fade into the distance. It simply left so quickly that I could not properly follow the path it took. I stood there, staring at the sky. I remember looking around, expecting to see it somewhere else. I expected it to come back, circle around, or reappear in another direction. I kept searching the sky, but there was nothing. The air looked normal again. The evening looked normal again. The car was still parked. The music was still playing. My cousin was still in the driver's seat. For a few seconds, I did not know what to say. Then I called out to her. I said her name and tried to explain what I had just seen. I was excited and scared at the same time. I probably spoke too fast. I told her something had flown over the car. I told her it looked like a plate. I told her it had lights. I told her it flashed at us and then flew away. She did not believe me. She had been zoning out, listening to music, and apparently she had not seen anything at all. That confused me almost as much as the object itself. The lights had been so bright. The thing had been directly above the car. The passenger door was open. I had been close enough to see the outline clearly. I could not understand how she had missed it. But she told me she had seen nothing. Maybe she thought I was making it up. Maybe she assumed I had seen an airplane, a bird, or some light in the sky, and exaggerated it because I was a kid. Maybe she was too distracted by the music to look up. Maybe the object had passed during the exact moment she was looking somewhere else. I do not know. All I know is that I was the only one who saw it. That made the memory harder to carry. If she had seen it too, maybe I would have felt more confident. We could have compared what we saw. We could have talked about whether it had made a sound, how high it was, what color the lights were, and where it went. But she saw nothing. So I was left with the image in my head. a round, plate-shaped object directly over the car. Bright lights flashing, then impossible speed. That night, I had a dream. At least, I think it was a dream. I remember going to sleep after the strange thing in the sky happened. I do not remember telling anyone else about it. I may have mentioned it to my cousin again, but if I did, she still did not believe me. I probably tried to move on because I was a kid and had no idea what to do with an experience adults would likely dismiss. But the dream stayed with me. In the dream, I saw something that looked like a planet. It was massive. At first, I thought it was just a dark planet floating in space. But the longer I looked at it, the more it seemed like it was not a planet at all. It looked like a ship. A giant ship so large that it seemed to take up the space where a planet should be. It was dark, almost black, and difficult to see clearly against the darkness around it. But there were lights coming from it. So many lights, small bright points shining across its surface in patterns that made it look alive or active. It did not look like a normal spaceship from a movie. It did not have one clear shape that I could understand. It was too big, too dark, too far away. But I remember knowing somehow that it was a ship. Then I saw thousands of smaller flying objects connected to it. They moved around it, near it, away from it, and back toward it. Some looked like bright dots. Some looked like small shapes against the darkness. There were so many that it felt impossible to count them. They seemed connected to the massive dark object the way smaller boats might be connected to a ship, or the way insects might move around a hive. I remember the feeling of looking at that massive object and realizing it was not empty. It was full of lights, full of movement, full of things flying around it. The dream did not feel comforting. It did not feel like one of those random dreams you forget by morning. It felt huge. It felt dark. It felt like I was seeing something I was not supposed to see. When I woke up, I remembered the dream immediately. And because it came on the same night as the object above the car, the two memories became connected in my mind. I do not know whether they were actually connected. They may not have been. Dreams can take things from the day and turn them into strange images. If I saw something unusual in the sky, it would make sense that my mind created a dream about space, flying objects, lights, or a giant ship. That might be the most reasonable explanation. But even so, the dream felt different because of how vivid it was. I remember the darkness around the massive object. I remember the lights. I remember the feeling that there were thousands of smaller things moving around it. And I remember waking up with the same uneasy feeling I had when I watched the plate-shaped object fly away. For years, I did not tell anyone about the experience. I did not know how. What was I supposed to say? That when I was 8 years old, I sat in a car with my cousin, felt an urge to look up, and saw a round object fly directly above us? That it flashed bright lights toward us? That it vanished at impossible speed? That my cousin saw nothing? Then, later that night, I dreamed of a dark planet-sized ship with thousands of smaller objects around it. It sounded too strange. It sounded like something people would laugh at. And maybe that is why it stayed in my head for so long. I kept going back to the details. I remembered the passenger door open beside me. I remembered my cousin sitting in the driver's seat with music playing. I remembered how quiet the object seemed. I remembered the brightness of the lights. I remembered the exact spot where we were parked. I remembered what I was wearing. I remembered the feeling of standing outside the car and staring up. A lot of people have strange childhood memories. Sometimes they are dreams that feel real. Sometimes they are normal things seen from a strange angle. Sometimes an ordinary object becomes mysterious because you are young, tired, excited, or scared. I have thought about all of that. Maybe I saw a plane from an unusual angle. Maybe it was a drone, though I do not know whether drones like that would have been common at the time. Maybe it was a helicopter, a remote-controlled aircraft, or some kind of light reflecting off something in the sky. Maybe the bright flashes came from a nearby building, car, or tower, and my memory combined them with the object. Maybe I only thought it was shaped like a plate because I was 8 years old and did not know what I was looking at. Those explanations are possible, but they do not fully match the feeling of the memory. The object did not feel distant. It did not feel ordinary. It did not feel like something I had seen before. And I still cannot explain why I suddenly felt the need to look up at the exact moment it passed above the car. That part has always bothered me. Why did I look? Why did I leave the passenger seat? Why did I turn my eyes to the sky at that exact second? Maybe it was luck. Maybe I heard something without realizing it. Maybe I saw a reflection or movement that made me curious. Or maybe I just looked up at the right time. I cannot know. What I do know is that the memory has never left me. I can remember the color of the evening. I can remember the open car door. I can remember my cousin's music. I can remember the way she looked when I tried to tell her what I saw and she did not believe me. And I can remember looking into the sky and seeing something round, bright, and silent directly above us. Then it was gone. I do not know what it was. I do not know whether it was an airplane, a drone, a strange light, a dream like misunderstanding, or something I will never be able to explain. I do not know whether the dream meant anything, but I do know why the experience still stays with me. For one brief moment, I saw something in the sky that did not fit into anything I understood. And ever since then, part of me has wondered what was looking down at us from above that car. Forgive me for stepping in for just a moment. If you've only recently found your way here, then welcome. I'm glad you came. If these stories are keeping you company tonight, consider subscribing to Crowvane Manor. New stories arrive here often, the kind that stay with you long after the night is over. And if you tap the bell, you won't have to go looking. The next one will find you on its own. Thank you for being here. Now, let's return to where we left off. When I was around 7 or 8, my brother and I saw something we still cannot explain. We have talked about it many times since then. We have compared what we remember, tried to fill in the gaps, and asked our parents about it more than once. The strange part is that we both remember the same main details, even though we were young when it happened. We remember the night. We remember the road. We remember where we were sitting in the van. We remember the thing in the sky. What neither of us remembers is how it ended. It was summer, during school break. My brother and I had spent the day with our grandparents, who lived about 3 hours away from us. Visiting them usually meant a long drive. As kids, we would be excited at the beginning of the trip, then get bored, then sleepy, then excited again when we finally got close to home. That day had been normal. We had spent time at our grandparents' house, probably eaten too much food, listened to adults talk, and done the usual things children do when they visit family. By the time we left, it was late. I remember being tired, but not tired enough to sleep right away. The drive home had only just begun. We were maybe half an hour into the trip. It was fully dark outside, but the sky was clear. There were no city lights around us. We were driving through open farmland with long, flat stretches of road, fields on either side, and very little around us besides fences, distant trees, and the occasional farmhouse light. The sky looked huge. That is one thing I remember clearly. When you are driving through open farmland at night, there is nothing blocking your view. No tall buildings, no thick forest, no streetlights everywhere. The stars seem closer because there is so much empty sky above you. I was lying in the back seat of the van with my head resting on the wheel hump. It was not exactly comfortable, but children can fall asleep anywhere. And I had found a position where I could look up through the window. I was watching the stars. I remember looking at the sky and letting my eyes follow the faint lights above us. I had probably been trying to find familiar shapes, though I did not know many constellations at that age. Mostly, I liked watching the stars because they made the long drive feel less boring. My brother was nearby. I do not remember whether he was sitting up or lying down, but he was close enough that I could poke him and get his attention without moving far. Our parents were in the front seats. One of them was driving, and the other was probably looking ahead or talking quietly. The van made the usual road sounds, tires on pavement, the low engine noise, maybe the soft hum of air coming through the vents. Everything felt normal. Then I saw something above us. At first I thought it was a bright star. It was in the sky above and to the left of the van, and it was glowing more strongly than the stars around it. But after a second, I realized it was too low and too close to be a star. It was moving with us. The object stayed in the same position above the van. Not directly over the center, but above and slightly to the left, almost like it was following us. As the van moved forward down the road, it moved too. It kept the same distance. It did not drift behind us or move ahead. It just stayed there. I remember staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked close, no more than 100 feet away, at least from how it appeared to me. I know judging distance in the dark is difficult, especially when you are a child looking through a car window, but it did not feel far away. It did not look like something high in the atmosphere. It looked like it was just above the van, traveling beside us. At first, the object looked circular. It was bright, almost glowing from the inside. There was no obvious engine sound, no beam of light, no blinking pattern like an airplane. It was just there, moving with us against the dark sky. I poked my brother. I remember doing it quickly because I did not want the object to disappear before he could see it. I told him to look. He looked out the window. Then he saw it too. That is the first reason I know I did not imagine the whole thing. My brother reacted immediately. He did not ask what I was talking about. He did not say there was nothing there. He looked at the object and watched it with me. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. We just stared. Then, the object started changing shape. It was not a slow change, like a cloud drifting through the sky and becoming something else over time. It changed quickly and smoothly. One moment it looked round, almost like a glowing disc. Then it stretched and formed a triangle. Not a perfect sharp-edged triangle, exactly, more like the light itself was reshaping. The outline shifted. The glowing mass changed. Then it became more rectangular. Then it stretched into an oval. Then it seemed to flatten and widen. Then it went back toward a different shape again. It kept changing. The closest thing I can compare it to is a glob of water floating in zero gravity. It moved as though it had no fixed structure, like something fluid was holding itself together in the air, changing form without breaking apart. But it did not behave like water. It behaved like something deliberate. The shape changes seemed too smooth and too organized to be random. The object would pulse, then change. It would brighten, then stretch. It would dim slightly, then pull itself into another form. The whole time it did this, it also changed colors. It glowed in colors I had never seen anything else glow in. At one point, it looked blue, then it faded into green, then yellow, then orange, then red, then purple, then a color that seemed almost white, but not normal white. It was bright and glowing, like neon light behind a thin surface. The colors did not flicker sharply like Christmas lights. They blended into each other slowly and seamlessly. One color would melt into another. The object looked alive because of it. Not alive like an animal or person, but active. It had movement. It had rhythm. It seemed to pulse from the inside, getting brighter and dimmer in time with the shape changes. I remember watching it and feeling amazed before I felt afraid. At first, it was beautiful. It was like watching a light show in the sky, a floating object changing shape and color above a moving van. It did not seem possible, but it was so strange and bright that I could not look away. My brother could not either. We were both watching it in complete fascination. We tried to get our parents' attention. That was the part that has always bothered me. We called out to them. I do not remember exactly what we said. Maybe we shouted, "Look." Maybe we said, "There's something outside." Maybe we tried to say there was a weird light following the van. But our parents did not react. They did not turn around. They did not ask what we were talking about. They did not tell us to stop yelling. They just kept driving. At first, we thought they had not heard us. The van was moving, the road was making noise, and maybe the radio was on low in the front. So we tried again. We called louder. Still nothing. Our parents kept looking forward. They did not even give us the normal response parents give when children are being loud in the back seat. They did not tell us to settle down. They did not ask whether we were okay. There was no sign that they heard a word we said. That felt strange even then. My brother and I kept looking at the object, then looking toward the front seats. We wanted someone else to see it. We wanted our parents to confirm that it was real. But they stayed completely focused on the road. The object kept pacing us. It held its position above and to the left of the van. It did not fall behind. It did not pass us. It did not move away into the distance. It seemed to travel with us, maintaining the same spot in the sky. The colors continued changing. The shapes continued shifting. Sometimes it looked almost round again. Then it would become triangular, then rectangular, then long and oval-shaped. At moments, it seemed to flatten into something thin and wide. At others, it looked almost like a glowing ball. Every change happened smoothly, as though the object was made of light and liquid at the same time. I remember feeling like we watched it for a long time, long enough that we got used to looking at it, long enough that we stopped trying to understand it and just stared, long enough that I started wondering whether it would follow us all the way home. But this is where the memory becomes strange. Neither my brother nor I remembers how the encounter ended. We do not remember the object leaving. We do not remember it flying away. We do not remember it fading out. We do not remember looking away. We do not remember falling asleep. We do not remember our parents finally responding. The next thing either of us remembers is pulling into our driveway. We were home. The drive had taken around 3 hours, so we had roughly 2.5 hours of the trip left after the object first appeared. But neither of us remembers those hours. One moment, we were in the back of the van watching this impossible thing in the sky. The next, we were arriving home. There was no clear transition, no memory of the road, no memory of stopping for gas, no memory of passing through towns, no memory of being sleepy, no memory of the object disappearing. just the image of it changing shapes and colors above the van, followed by the image of the driveway. That is the part that creeps me out the most. If I had been alone, I might have convinced myself it was a dream. I was young. It was late. I had spent the day traveling. I could have fallen asleep while looking at the stars and had a vivid dream about something in the sky. Then I could have woken up when we got home and remembered the dream as though it happened outside the window. That would be possible. But my brother remembers it too. He remembers the object. He remembers it pacing the van. He remembers the colors changing. He remembers the shapes changing. He remembers trying to get our parents' attention. And he also does not remember how it ended. We have talked about it many times over the years. Sometimes we bring it up casually, like one of those strange childhood memories siblings share. Other times, we talk about it seriously and try to see whether one of us remembers a detail the other forgot. But the same gap is always there. We remember the beginning. We remember the middle. We remember the object. Then nothing. Our parents do not remember it at all. That is another part we cannot explain. We asked them about the drive. We asked if they remember us calling out from the back seat. We asked if they remember seeing anything strange in the sky. We asked whether there was a time we got unusually quiet or fell asleep suddenly. We asked whether they noticed anything strange on the road. They do not remember. As far as they are concerned, it was a normal drive home from my grandparents' house. They remember leaving late. They remember driving through farmland. They remember getting home. But they do not remember us pointing out an object. They do not remember us calling to them. They do not remember anything unusual. That makes it difficult to explain. Maybe my brother and I had the same dream somehow. Maybe we talked about a strange light as children, and our memories blended together over time. Maybe one of us saw something ordinary and described it to the other, and we both built the same story around it. Siblings can influence each other's memories, especially when something happens young. That is possible. Maybe we saw an airplane or a drone-like object at a strange angle. Maybe the colors came from lights reflecting through the van window. Maybe the changing shapes were caused by the glass, movement of the vehicle, and tired eyes. That is possible too. Maybe our parents did hear us, but we were too quiet for them to understand. Maybe they assumed we were playing in the back and ignored us. Maybe we fell asleep right afterward and simply do not remember the rest of the drive because we were children and long car rides blurred together. That could explain the missing time. But it does not explain why the memory feels so clear. I remember lying on the wheel hump. I remember the open farmland outside. I remember the stars. I remember poking my brother. I remember both of us staring through the window. I remember the object maintaining a fixed position above the van. I remember the way it changed from a circle to a triangle, then a rectangle, then an oval. I remember the neon-like colors fading smoothly from one into another. I remember the pulsing brightness, and I remember trying to get our parents to look. Those details have stayed with me for years. The object did not feel like an airplane. Airplanes do not usually hold a fixed position over a moving van. They do not reshape themselves from circular to triangular to rectangular. They do not glow through every color imaginable while pulsing in time with their changing shape. It did not feel like a helicopter either. There was no sound that I can remember. No rotor noise. No steady beam. No movement like a normal aircraft. It did not feel like a meteor, a star, or a firework. It was too close, too controlled, too responsive to the movement of the van. Still, I do not know what it was. I cannot say it was alien. I cannot say it was a spacecraft. I cannot say anything supernatural happened to us that night. All I can say is that my brother and I saw something neither of us can explain. and we both remember the same strange details. The worst part is not necessarily the object itself. The worst part is the ending that does not exist. There should be a memory of it leaving. There should be a memory of the road continuing. There should be a memory of our parents responding. There should be some memory between watching that thing in the sky and pulling into the driveway. But there is not. Even now, when I look up at a clear night sky, I sometimes think about that drive home. I think about the dark farmland. I think about the van moving down an empty road. I think about being a child, lying in the back seat and looking at stars. Then I think about a glowing object pacing us from above, shifting shape and color as though it was showing us something. And I think about how somehow we made it home without remembering the rest of the night. My friend and I had a game we used to play after dark called Hide from Cars. It was exactly as stupid as it sounds. We were kids, and for some reason we thought it was exciting to go out to the front yard in the street late at night, stand where we were not supposed to be, and wait for headlights to appear in the distance. As soon as we saw a car coming, we would run and hide behind anything we could find. Bushes, trees, parked cars, the side of a house. Anything that would keep the driver from seeing us. There was no real point to it. Nobody won anything. Nobody was keeping score in any serious way. It was just one of those dumb childhood games that felt thrilling because we knew we should not be doing it. The danger was the fun part. We were not trying to get hit or cause trouble, but we liked the rush of seeing headlights appear and racing to get out of sight before the car came closer. Looking back, it was reckless. At the time, it felt like adventure. The neighborhood was usually quiet at night. After a certain hour, there were not many cars on the road, so the waiting became part of the game. We would stand there in the darkness, listening to the night sounds, watching for the glow of headlights far down the street. Sometimes a car would turn onto the road suddenly, and we would panic and dive behind bushes. Sometimes we would mistake a porch light or distant reflection for headlights and hide for no reason. Sometimes we would laugh so hard while hiding that we probably made more noise than if we had just stood there. It was childish, but that was the point. One night, we went out to play around 11 p.m. It was late enough that the neighborhood had settled down. Houses were dark, or mostly dark. The air was cool. The street looked empty, with only a few porch lights and distant lights from nearby homes breaking up the darkness. The nearby hills were visible in the distance. They were probably about half a mile away, maybe a little more. During the day, they were just ordinary hills with trees and brush covering them. There were trails and forested patches, and the land rose up enough that you could see the dark shape of the hills against the sky at night. There was also a major U.S. Air Force base in the general area. That is something I have always kept in mind when I think about this story. It is the most reasonable explanation for what we saw. Living near a base meant seeing aircraft was not unusual. Planes flew over sometimes. Helicopters were not impossible. Military activity was part of the background of the place, even if we did not always know what we were seeing. But that night, what we saw did not move or sound like the helicopters and planes we were used to. We were standing outside, waiting for cars, when we noticed lights hovering above the hills. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The lights were not moving like a car on a road. They were not near the ground, and they were not following any path that made sense. They were up in the sky, just above the dark outline of the hills, staying almost still. I nudged my friend or said something to get his attention. We both stopped, paying attention to the street. The lights were arranged in a triangle, not a small triangle like distant airplane lights that could be explained by perspective. This looked large, about the size of a medium airplane, at least from where we stood. It was hard to judge distance at night, especially with something hovering over the hills, but it looked big enough that we both knew we were not staring at a toy, a kite, or some small object close to us. There were brighter red and blue lights at the tips of the triangle. They seemed fixed in place, marking the corners of whatever it was. The lights were bright enough to be seen clearly from our neighborhood, but not so bright that they lit up the whole sky. Then there was the center. In the direct middle of the triangle, there was a large ball of swirling light. That was the part I remember most. The middle light was not one steady color. It shifted constantly. It looked like colors moving inside a glass sphere or a bright glowing cloud trapped in the center of the object. It changed from one color to another without warning, sometimes brighter, sometimes dimmer, never staying the same for long. It did not look like a normal aircraft light. It looked like something alive with movement. The red and blue points made the triangle easy to see, but the center made it impossible to look away. We stood there, dumbfounded. For a while, neither of us said anything important. We just stared at it. The whole reason we had gone outside was to hide from passing cars. But the game disappeared from our minds completely. A car could have come down the street at that moment, and I do not think either of us would have cared. The object hovered above the hills. Then a beam of light came down from it. It pointed into the forested area below. The beam was not constant. It seemed to appear, sweep or angle downward, then disappear. A little later, it would come again. It looked like whatever was up there was shining light into the trees. Not at the road, not at the neighborhood, at the forest. The beam reached down into the dark hills, and for a second, part of the tree line below it would become faintly visible. Then it would vanish, leaving the hillside black again. That was when I started feeling afraid. Before that, it was strange, but almost exciting. A big triangle of lights over the hills sounded like the kind of thing a kid would brag about seeing. But the beam changed the feeling. It made the object seem purposeful. It was not just hovering. It was looking at something, searching something, doing something. The triangle began moving slowly over the hills. It did not fly like an airplane. It did not travel across the sky in one smooth line. It hovered forward, almost drifting, while still staying level. It would move a little, pause or slow, then continue. The beam continued to appear and point down into the forest. There was barely any sound. That may be the strangest thing about it. If it had been a helicopter, we should have heard rotors. Even from half a mile away, a helicopter at night is hard to miss. The chop of the blades carries. You feel the sound as much as hear it. And if it had been a plane, there should have been engine noise, or it should have been moving much faster and in a more normal flight path. But this thing was quiet. Not perfectly silent, maybe. There may have been a faint hum or low sound, but there was no obvious engine noise. No roaring, no chopping, no deep rumble. Nothing that matched the size and movement of the object. My friend reacted differently than I did. Instead of hiding or running inside, he ran out into the street. He started waving his arms. Then he shouted, "Take me with you." I remember feeling a sharp panic when he did that. It was one thing to stand in the yard and stare at something strange over the hills. It was another thing for him to run into the open and try to get its attention. I did not want it to see us. I did not want to be noticed by whatever was up there. The moment he started waving and yelling, I wanted distance between myself and him. I was scared that if the object did notice anything, it would notice both of us. So I hid behind a tree. That sounds funny now, but at the time I was genuinely afraid. We had started the night hiding from cars, laughing like idiots. Now I was hiding from something in the sky because I did not want to get abducted. That was the word that came into my mind. Abducted? I was a kid. I had heard stories about UFOs and aliens. I had seen movies and television shows where people saw lights in the sky and then disappeared. I did not know what the object was, but I knew I did not want to stand under it, waving my arms. So I stayed behind the tree and watched from there. My friend kept looking up at it. The object did not seem to notice him. At least, it did not react in any way we could see. It did not turn toward us. It did not shine the beam in our direction. It did not move closer to the neighborhood. It continued hovering over the hills, focusing its light down into the forest. That almost made it creepier. It was like we were not important, like whatever it was doing had nothing to do with us, and we were just lucky or unlucky enough to see it. For a minute or more, the object stayed in view. I cannot say exactly how long. When you are scared, time stretches. It could have been 1 minute. It could have been several. I only know it was long enough for us to watch it carefully, long enough for my friend to run into the street and shout, long enough for me to hide and keep watching from behind the tree. The beam came down again. The center light continued swirling. The red and blue points kept the triangular shape visible. Then the object began to pick up speed. It moved toward the other side of the hills. At first, it was still slow and smooth. Then it became faster. It crossed over the ridgeline and moved away from us until the shape became harder to see. The beam disappeared. The triangle of lights shifted farther over the hills. Then it was out of our view, just gone beyond the rise of the land. We stood there for a while after it disappeared. My friend was still excited, but I was shaken. The whole thing had happened too clearly for us to pretend we had not seen it. We both knew there had been something above those hills. We both saw the triangular pattern. We both saw the red and blue lights at the corners. We both saw the swirling ball of changing light in the center. We both saw the beam shining down into the forest. And we both knew it had not sounded like a normal aircraft. Eventually, the neighborhood went back to feeling ordinary. The street was quiet again. The hills were dark again. There were no strange lights in the sky. But the game was over for me. I did not want to stand in the road anymore. I did not want to wait for headlights. I did not want to laugh and dive behind bushes. The night felt too open now, too exposed. I kept looking toward the hills. I expected the triangle to come back. I expected the beam to appear again, maybe closer this time. But nothing else happened. Later, I tried to think of normal explanations. The Air Force base was the obvious one. Maybe it was some kind of military vehicle. Maybe it was an experimental aircraft. Maybe it was an early drone or something being tested near the base. If anyone would have access to unusual flying machines, it would be the military. The triangle shape, the lights, the quiet movement, and the beam could all have been part of a test or training exercise. That explanation makes sense in some ways. But it still does not explain everything. It hovered in a way that did not look like a plane. It moved too quietly to seem like a helicopter. The center light did not look like normal equipment. The beam into the trees felt deliberate, but strange. And the whole thing stayed low enough over the hills that it felt like it was interacting with the area, not just passing over. Maybe it was a helicopter seen from an odd angle. Maybe there were multiple aircraft, and the lights only looked like one triangular object because of where we were standing. Maybe the swirling light was a spotlight, searchlight, or some kind of reflection. Maybe the lack of sound was because of wind direction or distance. That could be true. But at the time, standing there as a kid, it did not look like separate aircraft. It looked like one large object, one triangle, one center, one beam, one slow, silent search over the forest. I do not claim to know what it was. I cannot say it was aliens. I cannot say it was definitely military. I cannot say it was a secret drone or some kind of aircraft nobody in the public knew about. All I can say is that my friend and I saw something over the hills that night, and it behaved differently from anything we knew how to explain. The part I think about most is not even the shape. It is the beam. That light going down into the forest made it feel like the object was there for a reason. It was not just moving through the sky. It was inspecting the hills, searching the trees, looking for something. Maybe it was a training exercise. Maybe someone on that aircraft, if it was an aircraft, was using a searchlight for some official reason. Maybe they were looking for a person, an animal, equipment, or something related to the base. But we never heard anything about it. No one came around asking if anyone had seen anything. No news story popped up about a search. No explanation reached us that made the memory feel less strange. It just became one of those things we saw and could not prove. Over the years, I have heard people talk about UFO sightings and strange lights in the sky. A lot of the time, I understand why others are skeptical. Distant planes can look strange at night. Helicopters can seem to hover in place. Military aircraft can do things civilians are not used to seeing. Lights can reflect off clouds. People can misjudge size, distance, and sound in the dark. I know all of that. But I also know what it felt like to stand in that street at 11 p.m., look up over the hills, and see a triangle of lights hanging there with a swirling center. I know what it felt like to watch it shine a beam down into the forest. I know what it felt like when my friend ran into the street and invited it to take him, while I hid behind a tree because I was afraid it actually might. And I know that whatever it was, it did not behave like the planes and helicopters we recognized. Maybe it came from the Air Force Base. Maybe it was something completely ordinary seen from an angle that made it look impossible. Maybe it was something neither of us were supposed to understand. I still do not know. But I have never forgotten those lights over the hills, and I have never forgotten how quickly our stupid little game of hiding from cars turned into me hiding from something in the sky. This happened around 5 or 6 years ago, and the reason it has stayed with me for so long is because we actually recorded part of it. I still have the video. I do not watch it often. Even now, I hesitate before opening the file because I know what I am going to see. I know there may be a normal explanation somewhere in it, something about the lighting, the camera quality, or a person we somehow did not notice. But every time I have watched the part that matters, I get the same cold feeling in my chest. At the time, my friend and I were altar boys at our local church. We were both young enough to think being allowed behind certain doors made us important, but old enough to get bored when adults were busy. We helped during Mass, wore the robes, followed instructions, and did the usual small tasks we were given. Sometimes one of our parents would drop us off, sometimes we would get picked up afterward, and sometimes we would hang around the church until the adults finished whatever they were doing. The church itself was not ancient or obviously creepy. It was just an ordinary local church with a main sanctuary, side rooms, offices, storage areas, a hall, and long, quiet corridors that always felt bigger after everyone had gone home. During Mass, the building was full of sound. You had people talking before the service, organ music, singing, children crying, doors opening, chairs moving, footsteps, announcements, and the normal echo of a large room full of people. But after Mass, once most of the congregation had left, the church changed. It became too quiet. The lights still stayed on in some areas, but they always seemed dimmer once the building was mostly empty. The hallways looked longer. Every room had that empty smell of old carpet, polished wood, dust, candles, and whatever cleaning product was used on the floors. It was around 7 p.m. after evening mass when this happened. My friend and I were waiting for his dad to pick us up. Usually, his dad would be ready to leave soon after the service ended. But that night, he needed to stay behind to practice with the choir. That meant we had time to kill. At first, we probably did what kids always do when they are waiting somewhere boring. We sat around, talked, messed with things we were not supposed to touch, and complained about how long it was taking. Then, one of us had the idea to go into the back hall and do some ghost hunting. We were not serious about it. That is important. We did not go there because we believed the church was haunted. We had probably watched ghost hunting shows on television or online, the kind where people walk around dark buildings whispering into cameras and acting terrified of every noise. We thought it was funny. We wanted to copy them. The back hall was the perfect place for it because it was quiet and mostly empty. It had a long hallway with rooms branching off it. There were storage rooms, classrooms, bathrooms, and other spaces that did not get much use after Mass. The lights were on, but the hallway still had darker areas where the bulbs did not reach as well. We took a camera with us. It was probably a phone or some kind of small camera. I do not remember exactly what model, only that it recorded video well enough for us to watch it afterward. We were not trying to make a real documentary. We just wanted to record ourselves acting scared and then laugh about it later. We walked down the hall holding the camera out in front of us. At first, we were making stupid comments. One of us would say something like, "Did you hear that?" even though we had not heard anything. Then, the other person would pretend to panic. We would point the camera at a dark corner and whisper that something was moving. We copied the dramatic way people on ghost shows would stop, look around, and speak quietly into the camera. It was all a joke. The building made normal sounds, of course. The air conditioner clicked. Something creaked in a wall. A door somewhere deeper in the church may have shifted slightly. Every sound became something we could pretend was paranormal. We would laugh, then walk farther down the hallway. The camera was not pointed in one direction the whole time. We were careless with it. Sometimes it was aimed at the floor, sometimes at each other, sometimes down the hall, sometimes at the ceiling. We were not carefully checking rooms or trying to capture evidence. We were just waving it around while being stupid. We spent maybe 15 minutes doing that. Eventually, we got bored. Nothing had happened. No one had jumped out at us. We had not heard any strange voice. No door had opened. No shadows had crossed the hall. It had been exactly what it should have been. Two altar boys in an empty church hallway pretending to hunt ghosts because they did not want to sit quietly and wait for a choir practice to end. So we went back and decided to watch the recording. We expected to laugh at ourselves. We expected to hear how dumb our voices sounded and see how dramatic we had been over normal noises. We probably thought we would make fun of each other for being bad actors. For the first couple of minutes, that was exactly what happened. The footage was shaky. The camera moved too quickly. You could hear us talking and laughing. There were parts where one of us whispered something fake, and the other one overreacted. We watched it the way people watch videos of themselves doing something embarrassing, stopping to laugh or point out a dumb comment. Then we saw something in the background. At first, we did not understand what we were looking at. The camera had been aimed down the hallway. It was not perfectly steady, but it gave a clear enough view toward the far end. The hallway was empty when we were walking through it. At least, we thought it was. We had not seen anybody else there. But in the video, near the bottom of the hall, there was a figure. It looked like a little girl. Not clearly enough that I could describe every detail of her clothes or her face right away, but clearly enough that she looked human. She was small. She seemed to be standing partly behind the edge of the hallway, peeking toward where we were. For a few seconds, my friend and I just stared at the screen. We assumed it had to be someone who had come into the building. Maybe a child from another family had stayed behind after Mass. Maybe someone had walked down the hall while we were filming, and neither of us noticed. It was possible. The church had multiple rooms, and people could have been in other areas. We were not paying attention to anything except our dumb ghost hunting joke. But then, we rewound it. The figure was still there. We played it again. It looked like she was peeking around the corner toward us. Then the camera moved away, and the camera swung back toward the hallway. The figure seemed to be in a different position. That was when the joke stopped being funny. The strange part was not simply that there appeared to be a little girl in the video. The strange part was how she moved. At one moment, she seemed to be partly visible near the end of the hallway. It looked like she was standing close to the wall, barely peeking out. Then the camera moved away for what felt like a second. When it came back, she appeared to be farther out in the hallway. Then, when the camera panned toward her again, she seemed to pull back into the same original position. It was as if she was waiting for a chance to get closer. That is the only way I can describe it. She did not seem to be walking normally down the hallway. She did not seem to be approaching us in a way that would make sense. It looked more like she was there, then farther out, then gone back to the side without enough time passing for her to move that way. We rewound the footage again. And again. At first, we tried to find a normal explanation. Maybe the camera was moving faster than we remembered. Maybe she had been standing in a different part of the hall the entire time, and the changing angle made it look like she was shifting position. Maybe there were two girls. Maybe she was moving behind something we could not see clearly. But the more we watched, the worse it looked. There was a moment where she appeared almost in the middle of the hallway. Not completely in the open, but far enough out that she should have had to take several steps to get back behind the wall. Then, the camera moved. When it pointed back, she was peeking again from the original area. There was no clear moment of her walking back, no blur of movement, no sound of footsteps, no time for a normal person to cross that distance. She just seemed to be back where she had started. My friend and I looked at each other. I remember the feeling of the room changing. We had been sitting there watching a stupid video and laughing. Suddenly, neither of us wanted to speak loudly. We were both trying to act like it was nothing, but we kept rewinding the same few seconds because neither of us could understand what we were seeing. The girl was not in the hall when we were filming. We were sure of that. We had walked through the hallway ourselves. We had pointed the camera around. We had been making noise, laughing, moving, talking. If there had been a child standing at the end of the hall, we should have noticed. And if there had been a little girl there, why had she not said anything? Why had she not come closer? Why had she not called for an adult? Why had she only appeared in the recording? We watched the clip frame by frame. That was when we started noticing more. At first, we thought there was only one figure. But after replaying the footage several times, slowing it down and stopping at different points, we started to think there might have been two. One seemed closer to the far end of the hall. The other was harder to see. It might have been a shadow, a reflection, camera blur, or a shape created by the poor lighting. I am honest about that. The second figure was not as clear as the first, but when we paused the footage at certain moments, it looked like there was another small shape farther back, or partly hidden nearby. Then we caught what looked like a face. I still do not like looking at that part. It was not a sharp, perfect image. The video was not high quality, and the hallway lighting was not good. But for a few frames, you could make out something that seemed to have a face, a pale shape, dark areas where the eyes should have been. A small head turned toward the camera. That was enough for us. Whatever the footage showed, it did not look right. We did not finish watching the video. That is something I still regret and understand at the same time. Part of me wants to know what else was on the recording. If we had watched the full clip, maybe we would have found an explanation. Maybe the figure would have walked out into the open and revealed itself as an actual child. Maybe someone would have entered the hallway from another room. Maybe we would have seen the reason for the strange movement. But we were young, alone in the back part of an empty church, and suddenly convinced that we had recorded something we should not have seen. So, we left. Immediately, we stopped the video, grabbed our things, and got out of the hallway. I do not remember whether we ran all the way back to the main part of the church, but we moved quickly. The choir practice sounded safer. The voices, the music, the adults, the lights, all of it felt safer than sitting near that long hall and replaying the footage. After that, we watched the same section over and over. Not the full video, only the part where the figures appeared. We would pause it, rewind it, slow it down, and watch it frame by frame. Every time, we saw the same thing. Something that looked like a little girl peeking down the hallway, then moving in a way neither of us could explain. We showed the video to friends. We showed it to family. The reactions were mixed. Some people thought it was creepy immediately. They could see what we were talking about and agreed it looked like a little girl. Some said the movement was strange. Others told us it was probably just a child who had been there and was moving around while we did not notice. That was the explanation most people preferred. It made sense on the surface. Churches have children around. Families stay late after Mass. Maybe someone was waiting for a parent. Maybe she had wandered into the hall. Maybe she had been playing and hiding. Maybe we were so busy talking and joking that we somehow missed her. I understand why people would say that. But there was a problem. There was no little girl there that night. Not that we knew of. The people who had stayed behind were adults connected to the choir. My friend's dad was practicing with them. We did not see any families in the back hall. We did not see children running around. We did not hear anyone call for a child. We did not pass a little girl on our way in or out. And even if there had been a child, it still did not explain the movement. It did not explain how she seemed to shift from the middle of the hallway back to a peeking position almost instantly. It did not explain why we only noticed her in the footage. It did not explain why there seemed to be two small figures instead of one. For a long time, my friend and I avoided going back into that hall alone. We still had to be at church sometimes. We still helped with Mass. We still walked through parts of the building. But neither of us wanted to stand near the far end of the back hallway after that. During the day, it seemed ridiculous. The hallway was just a hallway. The rooms were just rooms. There was nothing visibly wrong with any part of it. Nothing about the church looked haunted. There were no old portraits with eyes that seemed to follow you. No strange symbols. No locked room everyone warned you about. No history we knew of that made the place feel dangerous. But at night, when it was mostly empty, I would think about the video. I would think about the little figure at the end of the hall. I would think about how she seemed to wait until the camera turned away. Then I would think about the moment the camera returned and she was peeking again from the same place. Sometimes I wonder whether it was all a trick of the footage. Maybe the camera had a frame rate problem. Maybe the movement looked faster because of missing frames or the way we were scrubbing through the clip. Maybe low light made a real person appear to jump from one place to another on video. Maybe the second figure was just a shadow or reflection. Maybe the face was something our minds created after we became scared. Those are all possible explanations. I cannot say for certain that the video captured ghosts. I cannot say for certain that there were really two figures in the hallway. I cannot say the girl was not a real child, even though we did not see anyone that age in the church at the time. But I can say that the clip scared us enough to make us leave immediately. I can say we were not trying to fake anything. We had started recording because we thought ghost hunting was funny. If we had wanted to create a fake video, we would have planned something. We would have asked someone to hide in the hall. We would have known what was going to happen. Instead, we found the figure by accident while replaying random footage. And I can say that even now, years later. I still get chills when I see the face in the video. The creepiest part is that we never watched the full clip. It is still there. Somewhere, the rest of that hallway footage is still waiting to be watched properly, and neither of us has ever felt comfortable sitting down and going through it from beginning to end. Maybe there's nothing else on it. Maybe the rest would answer every question. Maybe we would see a normal explanation that would finally make the whole thing less frightening. Or maybe we would find out that the little girl was not the only thing in that hallway. I do not know. And honestly, after all these years, part of me would rather not find out. When I was in college, I lived in a big old house with 5 other roommates. It was the kind of house that had probably been beautiful when it was first built, but by the time we lived there, it had a worn-out, slightly haunted feeling, even before anything strange happened. The floors creaked constantly. The doors stuck in their frames. The hallways were narrow and darker than they should have been, even with the lights on. Every room seemed to have its own strange noise. A pipe would knock somewhere in the walls. A floorboard would pop in an empty room. The heating system would kick on with a low groan that sounded almost like somebody dragging furniture across the basement. None of us really thought the house was haunted. We were college students. We mostly complained about the rent, the old appliances, and the fact that there were 6 people sharing one house with a kitchen that was barely big enough for 2 people to stand in at once. Still, the place had a weird atmosphere. It was too big for us, honestly. There were enough bedrooms that everyone had their own space. But the common areas always felt empty unless all of us were home at once. The living room had an old couch that smelled faintly of dust and whatever previous tenants had spilled on it. The kitchen connected to the side of the house through a door that led outside. That door always made me uncomfortable because it opened toward a narrow path beside the house and a patchy backyard that was badly lit at night. The backyard itself was not huge, but it was deep enough that you could not see every part of it from the house after dark. There were uneven patches of grass, a few old shrubs, some broken-looking fencing near the back, and shadows from trees that made the whole space feel larger than it really was. During the day, it was just a messy backyard. At night, it looked like the kind of place where someone could stand still for a long time without being noticed. One weekend, everybody left except me. Some of my roommates went home to visit family. Others had plans out of town. I do not remember exactly where everyone went, only that the house emptied out one person at a time until I was the only one left. The only other living thing in the house was one of my roommate's dogs. She was an adorable pit bull, sweet, friendly, affectionate, and honestly not intimidating at all unless you were a stranger who saw her before you got to know her. She was one of those dogs who looked tough but acted like a giant baby. She loved people, loved attention, and had the kind of face that made it hard to take her seriously when she tried to look angry. I had said I could watch her for the night. It was not a big deal. I liked the dog, and I figured it would be nice not to be alone in that old house. She had a heavy-duty kennel she slept in, and I knew her routine well enough. Take her out, feed her, let her hang around, make sure she did not get into anything. Then put her in the kennel when it was time for bed. The night started normally. I was in the living room watching television with the dog nearby. She was stretched out on the floor at first, relaxed and comfortable. I do not remember what I was watching. Probably something dumb and easy to have on in the background. I had the kind of relaxed mood you get when you have the whole house to yourself and nobody is arguing about the television, using the bathroom, cooking something disgusting in the kitchen, or playing music too loudly in another room. For a while, everything was fine. Then the dog started growling. It was quiet at first, a low, steady sound from deep in her chest. I looked over at her because it was strange. This dog was sweet. She could bark if someone knocked on the front door, but she was not normally aggressive or nervous. She had been lying down only a few minutes earlier, but now she was standing stiffly and staring toward the kitchen. The living room connected directly to the kitchen, and from where I was sitting, I could see part of the doorway. The dog was looking past it. Her ears were up. Her body was tense. The growl got louder. At first, I assumed there was an animal outside. Maybe a cat had come near the side door. Maybe a raccoon was digging through something. Maybe a squirrel or stray dog had wandered through the yard. The side door in the kitchen led outside, and the dog had always been curious about noises coming from that direction. So I got up to check. The moment I entered the kitchen, I felt something was wrong. All the lights were on. Every kitchen light. The overhead light was on. The small light above the stove was on. One of the lights near the sink was on, too. The room was brighter than it should have been, almost glaring after the darker living room. I had not turned any of them on. I was sure of that. I had been watching TV in the living room, and the kitchen had been dark. I would have noticed if the lights had been on because the doorway would have been glowing. But now the entire kitchen was lit up, as if someone had walked in and turned everything on at once. Then I saw the side door. It was open. Not wide open enough to swing freely, but open. The door was pulled away from the frame, leaving a dark gap leading outside. For a moment, I just stood there. The dog stayed behind me, still growling. I remember looking at the open door and trying to decide whether I had forgotten to lock it. Maybe one of my roommates had left it open before they left. Maybe the latch had not caught properly. Maybe the wind had pushed it open. But that did not explain the lights. It also did not explain why the dog was staring toward the kitchen like someone had been there. I walked over to the door. The outside air felt colder against my face. I looked out along the narrow side of the house. There was nothing visible, just darkness, the edge of the yard, and a faint bit of light from a nearby house. I did not step outside at first. I just listened. Nothing, no footsteps, no voices, no rustling in the bushes, no sound of a person moving away. I shut the door. Then I locked it. I checked the lock twice. I turned the handle to make sure it would not open. Then I went around the kitchen and turned off all the lights. The dog stopped growling after a little while, but she did not seem fully relaxed. I went back to the living room. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Old houses have weird doors. Maybe the latch was bad. Maybe the lights had been left on and I had not noticed them. Maybe the dog heard a raccoon or another animal outside. Maybe I had been tired, distracted, or a little high and had not paid attention to things that were obvious. That was the explanation I kept giving myself. I was tired. I was alone. The house was old. The dog was reacting to some normal outside noise. I kept watching TV, but I could not fully relax after that. Every time I heard the house settle, I looked toward the kitchen. Every time the dog lifted her head, I assumed she heard something near the side door again. I checked my phone. I turned the TV volume down a little. I listened harder than I normally would have. Eventually, it got late enough that I had to take the dog outside before bed. I put on shoes and grabbed whatever I used for her, then went toward the back door. The backyard was dark. There was a small exterior light, but it did not reach far. It lit the area close to the back steps and part of the grass. But the farther end of the yard faded into shadow. The dog walked out first. At first, she seemed normal. She sniffed around, moved through the grass, did what she needed to do. I stood near the door waiting, probably looking at my phone or watching the dark yard because I was already nervous after the kitchen door incident. Then, I saw a shadow. It was near the farther part of the backyard. At first, I thought it was a person. The shape looked hunched over, almost like someone crouching or bending down near the ground. It was too dark to make out details, but it had the rough outline of a body. A head. Shoulders, something bent forward. I froze. My first thought was that someone had come into the yard. Maybe someone had been near the side door earlier. Maybe they had entered the kitchen, turned the lights on, opened the door, and gone outside before I got there. Maybe they were still around the house. That thought made me angry before it made me scared. I yelled. Something like, "Hey, who's there?" The shape did not answer. The dog noticed it too. She stood still and looked toward the same part of the yard. I could feel the leash tighten slightly in my hand. I yelled again. Still nothing. Then I started walking toward it. That was stupid, but I was scared and angry. I wanted to know whether there was someone in my backyard. I did not want to stand by the door and let them hide there. I kept my eyes fixed on the hunched shape as I moved closer. The grass was uneven, and the outside light did not help much. I took a few steps, then a few more. The shadow was still there. It seemed to be facing away from me or bent over something near the ground. I could not see a face. I could not see what it was doing. I only knew it looked human enough that I kept expecting it to stand up. Then, as I got closer, it disappeared. Not like someone ran away. Not like someone ducked behind a tree. It was just gone. 1 second, I could see a dark, hunched shape in the yard. The next second, there was nothing there. I stopped walking. I stared at the spot. There was no fence close enough for someone to go behind, no large object to hide behind, no shed, no bush big enough to swallow an adult-sized person in a second. The yard was open in that area. I looked around. Nothing. The dog was still watching. That made it worse. If I had been alone, I might have said it was a trick of the light. I might have blamed the trees, the shadows, the uneven lawn, or whatever I had smoked earlier. But the dog had gone tense, too. She had looked directly toward the same part of the yard. I stood there for what felt like a long time. Then I decided I had enough. I brought the dog inside. I checked both doors. I checked the locks. I looked through the living room window toward the yard, but everything outside looked normal. The lawn was empty. The shadows were still where they should have been. There was no hunched person, no movement, and no sign that anyone had been there. At that point, I was thoroughly freaked out. I was convinced I had either seen something that was not there, or that I was just too high and my brain was turning ordinary shadows into people. I had not been drinking. I was not wildly out of it. But I had been smoking, and being alone in an old house can make your mind go places it would not normally go. So I decided to stop thinking about it. I put the dog in her kennel. The kennel was heavy duty. It was not one of those light wire crates a determined dog could push over or bend apart. It was solid, heavy, and secure. Once she was inside and the latch was locked, she could not get out. She had never escaped from it. She was not the type of dog who could quietly open a latch, wander around the house, and then lock herself back in. I made sure she was okay. I closed the kennel. I locked it. Then I went to bed. I did not sleep well. I remember waking up at least once during the night, not because of any obvious sound, but because the house felt too quiet. I lay there listening for movement from the kitchen or hallway. I thought about the open side door. I thought about the lights. I thought about the shadow in the backyard. But I did not get up. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Eventually, I fell asleep again. When I woke up in the morning, the first thing I noticed was the smell. It was strong enough that I knew immediately something was wrong. At first, I thought maybe the dog had gotten sick. I had been watching her overnight, and maybe she had had an accident. Dogs have accidents sometimes, especially in unfamiliar routines or when they are stressed. Then, I opened my bedroom door. There was a massive pile of dog poop right outside it. Not a small accident, not something you could reasonably blame on a nervous dog who held it too long. It was huge. I stood there in my doorway staring at it, trying to understand what I was looking at. My first thought was the dog. Obviously, she had to have gotten out of the kennel. Maybe I had not locked it properly. Maybe she had somehow pushed it open. Maybe she had panicked during the night after hearing something outside and made a mess in the house. It was gross, but it would have made sense. I stepped over it carefully and went toward the room where the kennel was. The dog was still inside, locked up, safe and sound. She looked normal. She was sitting there waiting for me, probably happy to see me, completely unaware that I was standing there trying to solve the dumbest mystery of my life. The kennel latch was still locked. The door was closed. There was no sign she had escaped. I checked it anyway. I opened it, closed it, and looked at the latch. There was no way she had gotten out without damaging something, making noise, or leaving the kennel door open. Then I looked at the size of the mess outside my bedroom again. The dog was a decent-sized pit bull, but those piles were enormous. They were almost as big as her head. That might sound exaggerated, but that is how it looked to me. Huge, heavy, ridiculous piles that did not seem possible for one dog to produce overnight, especially after I had taken her outside before bed. I hoped it was only one. It was not. I walked into the rest of the house and found more. There were piles in the kitchen. There were piles in the living room. There were piles in the hallway. By the time I counted, there were probably 8 of them spread around the common areas. 8. Not little accidents. Not a few droppings. Huge, post-Thanksgiving-sized dumps scattered through the house like someone had walked room to room doing it on purpose. I stood in the kitchen, staring at them, completely stunned. For a second, I wondered whether a person had broken into the house. That thought was horrible, but it made more sense than a ghost pooping all over the place. Maybe someone had entered through the side door. Maybe they had been in the kitchen the night before. Maybe the open door and lights were connected to them. Maybe the shadow in the yard had been a person. But if someone had broken in, why would they do that? Why would they turn on the lights, open a side door, lurk in the backyard, and then leave massive piles of poop throughout the house? Nothing had been stolen. Nothing was broken. No windows were damaged. No locks were forced. There were no obvious signs of someone going through rooms, and the dog had been in the house the whole time. Even if she was friendly, I had a hard time imagining a stranger walking around the house long enough to do all that without her barking, growling, or making enough noise to wake me. Then I wondered if it had been me. Maybe I had gotten up in the middle of the night and done something without remembering it. That possibility made me feel sick. Maybe I had been more out of it than I thought. Maybe I had sleepwalked. Maybe I had somehow wandered through the house in the dark, made a complete mess, and returned to bed without remembering any of it. But I had not been drinking. I had smoked earlier, but not enough to erase an entire night. I was on the smaller side, and even if I had eaten something bad, I seriously doubted I could have produced that much in one night. And the piles were in multiple rooms. It was not one accident in the bathroom. It was not one bad night. It looked like several different things had happened all over the house. I had no answer. The dog had not done it. At least, not as far as I could see. She was locked in the kennel. The kennel was secure. I had taken her outside before bed, and the size of the mess did not match what I thought she could physically produce. I checked the side door again. It was still locked from the inside. The kitchen lights were off because I had turned them off the night before. There was no sign that anyone had come in. No muddy footprints, no broken glass, no open windows, nothing. Just the smell, the piles, and the memory of that hunched shadow disappearing from the backyard. I did not tell my roommates. I do not know why. Maybe I was embarrassed. Maybe I thought they would assume I had done it and was blaming the dog. Maybe they would laugh at me. Maybe they would think I was too high and had imagined half of it. I also did not want to tell the dog's owner that something strange happened while I was watching her. I did not want them to think I had let her out or failed to take care of her properly. So I cleaned it all up. Every disgusting pile. I cleaned the hallway. I cleaned the kitchen. I cleaned the living room. I cleaned outside my bedroom door. I aired out the house as best I could. I used whatever cleaning supplies we had. I probably used too much. By the end of it, the whole house smelled like chemicals mixed with something I could not get out of my head. The dog watched me from her kennel at first, then followed me around after I let her out. She looked innocent. She always looked innocent. That made it almost funny, in a horrible way. She would wag her tail and look at me like she had no idea why I was so stressed. Maybe she did not. Maybe she really had nothing to do with it. By the time my roommates came back, the house looked normal. No one asked questions. No one noticed anything strange. I did not bring it up. I acted like the weekend had been completely ordinary. But I have been confused about it ever since. Maybe the dog escaped and somehow got back into the kennel. Maybe she had help from someone, though that seems unlikely. Maybe I had a weird sleepwalking episode and do not remember it. Maybe someone got into the house and did something unbelievably strange for reasons I will never understand. Maybe the shadow in the backyard was an animal, a person, or just my eyes making something out of the darkness. Maybe the lights and open side door were unrelated. Maybe the whole weekend was just a chain of weird but normal events that felt connected because I was alone in a big old house. I honestly do not know. But I remember the order of it too clearly. The dog growling toward the kitchen, the lights all being on, the side door hanging open, the hunched shadow in the yard, the dog locked securely in her heavy-duty kennel, then waking up to an enormous pile outside my bedroom door, and finding 7 or 8 more scattered around the house. It was not the kind of ghost story where something whispered my name or knocked on walls. It was worse in a way, because whatever happened left behind a mess I had to clean up. And I still have no idea who or what was responsible. If you've stayed with me this far, then these stories didn't simply pass the time. They stayed with you. Everything you heard tonight was real. Real people. Real moments. And in each one, something quietly slipped out of place. If you'd like more of the kind that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Crowvane Manor. There are more rooms left open and more stories waiting behind every door. I'm grateful you spent this part of your night here. Rest well, and I'll be waiting when you return.